The two major opposition parties are calling for a new presidential vote in Nigeria amid allegations of fraud and violence. We will take a look at the challenges for the largest democracy in Africa. Hi everyone, I'm Sean Caleb sitting in for Nnimmo, and you're watching The Heat. Welcome, everyone. Nigeria is a country thirsty for change. Young voters mobilized in record numbers last weekend to cast ballots in the presidential election. But the process faced familiar problems, delays, disorganization, and accusations of fraud. We begin with this report from Abuja.
Results continue to trickle in 72 hours after Nigeria's most anticipated elections. More than half of the results are in from 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. So far, from the results announced, the ruling party's APC presidential candidate Bola Ahmed Tinubu is taking the lead, followed by PDP's Atiku Abubakar and Labour Party's Peter Obi. Half of the political parties in the presidential race have boycotted the collation process, calling for an outright cancellation of the polls. They cited the Electoral Commission's failure to use the bimodal voters accreditation system, BVAS technology, to upload election results real-time from the polling units. Now they're questioning the credibility, transparency, and integrity of the process.
The result announced by INEC so far shows monumental disparities between the actual results reported by our party agents, our party members, and indeed millions of Nigerians on election day from the polling units. We have totally lost faith in the entire process.
Previous elections had been characterized by irregularity and fraud. The BVAS technology was meant to be the game changer in Nigeria's elections for its transparency and elimination of rigging. Chairman of the election management body, INEC, Mahmood Yakubu, has said he would speak to the issues after the collation process. It's looking more like the courts would be inundated with election matters. Meanwhile, tallying continues as more states arrive with their results. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Corruption and the economy are arguably the two main issues for voters in Nigeria. Despite the largest economy in Africa, the country suffers with high inflation, lack of jobs, leading many to migrate to Europe or the United States. But the country also faces an environmental challenge. Now, earlier, I spoke with Nnimmo Bassey. He is the Director of Health of Mother Earth Foundation. I began by asking him why climate change wasn't mentioned by any of the candidates.
Yes, as you rightly listed, the kind of impacts we have in Nigeria, they are enormous and many. And they affect people very directly because the majority of Nigerians derive their livelihoods directly from the environment. And we've noticed that the presidential candidates in the election, which result is being collated currently, have not focused much on the environment. In fact, because of this, we had to team up with other civil society organizations to host a town hall specifically focusing on the environment to the candidates. And out of 18 candidates, only 4 showed up for that town hall, which in any case was important. It's going to be extremely difficult for the citizens to expect to have an environment that supports them, that is healthy, that they can carry on with their farm agriculture and have access to other resources. It's going to be really difficult because as things stand right now, the candidates don't have, the ones that are front runners don't seem to have very strong positions with regard to climate change or with the environment at all.
Let's dig a bit deeper into that and the obvious concerns about that, because this is the most populous nation within the continent, and obviously the way Nigeria goes, really the whole region goes. So if population continues to grow at the projected rates, and the leaders aren't focused on something as important as climate change, it really could spell economic doom on top of everything else that that nation is facing.
It's something that we are really worried about, and it's something that we need to focus on in terms of policy advocacy to get politicians and other leaders to be very conscious of the fact that climate change is so real and has such deep connected impact on our economy, on our social life, on our culture, on our food supply, on everything. As you mentioned earlier in the introduction, Lake Chad has been shrinking. We have just about 10% of the size it was in the 1960s, going down from 25,000 square kilometers to just about 2,500 square kilometers. And that has meant displacement of farmers, of pastoralists, and also helped to raise an army of discontent people or people who are unemployed to join some factions or kind of groups that they would not ordinarily have joined. And so, yes, what happens in Nigeria influences what happens in the region, and in fact impacts what happens and the responses from governments in Africa. So we really need politicians who we are concerned that we should have politician leaders who have very clear knowledge about the impacts of climate change, and that this is things that can be solved by mathematics, such as we see in carbon markets and such kind of policies.
Mr. Bassey, one thing really jumped out at me, that only 30% of the people interviewed in Nigeria even know about climate change. How difficult does that make your job? How concerned are you about that nation moving forward?
Well, we've been speaking, we continuously work with the grassroots, we work in communities, we've done research on climate change at the grassroots level, especially among coastal communities and those who are impacted by desertification. The citizens may not describe climate change as in that kind of terminology, but they do know that that things have changed. They see the environmental change, they see ecological change, they see that the weather patterns have changed. And so the challenge for people is how to cope, how to adapt to what is going on. And that unfortunately is the responsibility that has been placed on the victims who are not contributors to the problem. And what we try to bring in addition to the table for solving this problem is to demand that those who have created the problem, those who are causing the problem, those who are still pumping the majority of the greenhouse gas to the atmosphere should also do the most to tackle the problem and not just leave it for the victims to struggle to survive.
Mr. Bassey, obviously oil is a huge resource in Nigeria, the second most of any nation within the continent of Africa. But there are all kinds of allegations that this is a resource that has simply been squandered over the past 2 decades. And secondly, just leads to widespread pollution, devastation. Talk about your concerns about the way oil is being handled within Nigeria.
Well, if you ask me, I would say Nigeria should stop extracting fossil fuels, oil and gas. But that has been our campaign for quite a while now. And rather, we're seeing those who are in the reins of power digging in all across the continent. More countries are digging for oil, but no one is looking at the impacts on the environment, on the communities. The level of devastation in Niger Delta would not be restored if all the wealth derived from oil were to be invested in environmental restoration. That may not be sufficient. And with what is going on right now, oil companies, international oil companies who have polluted the Niger Delta for over the past 6 decades are now attempting to divest, to sell off their rickety facilities and installations and move offshore or move elsewhere with their profits. So it's really something that needs very deep concentration. We need to reset the system to ensure that that the problems are not extended or expanded, not just in Nigeria, but across the continent. And we're seeing ways of encouraging policymakers to invest more in renewable resources and to seek wealth from other sources and not from something that's actually a deficit revenue.
And it seems if those companies do move away, they're going to leave Nigeria with a cleanup mess, but that's another story. But we've talked so much about so many negative things. Let's kind of focus on one real positive. So many young people right now are interested in the political system. So many young people are focused on this election. Does that give you hope for the future?
Absolutely. This is the hope that we have, the enthusiasm of the young people to bring about change. And you know what? No matter how people manipulate the system, subverting the political system, the electoral system, or whatever they do, with the kind of determination we see with the young ones, we are certain that change will come sooner than later.
Nnimmo Bassey, we can't thank you enough. The Director of Health of Mother Earth Foundation. We appreciate your insight, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now, to continue our discussion on Nigeria elections, let's bring in our panelist. Here in Washington, D.C., Kingsley Moghalu. He is the president of the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation and a former Nigerian presidential candidate himself. Uchenna Ikwo is the president of the Center for Media and Peace Initiatives. He's joining us from New York. And across the Atlantic, from Sheffield, in the UK, Remy Adekoya. He is an associate lecturer at the University of York. I want to thank you all, a lot to get to. Kingsley, I want to begin with you. Let's pick up on what Nnimmo Bassey was talking about right at the very end, about the young people who are voting. This is kind of throwing a wrench, if you will, in the long two-party system, because the third-party candidate, Peter Obi, is getting a lot of support from the young people. Obi won Lagos, he won Abuja. How significant do you think the youth involvement is in this election?
Huge, absolutely significant. Like you said rightly, the participation of young people is really throwing a wrench into the old established political order. But that old order is quite dug in, and they will do everything to resist, but it's futile in a way. Because we have seen that the young people have the numbers. They made up about 70% of registered voters. If you look at people aged between 18 and 49 combined. In Nigeria, we have a rather elastic definition of who a young person is. And so, you know, even people in their 40s, early 40s, for example, are still regarded as young people. So, you know, young people have participated very, very strongly, and they're coming with technology as well, which is part of what is creating the controversies that we are experiencing today as the results are being collated. Because, you know, there have been a lot of procedural and organizational failures. And of course, people seriously allege collusion. And we have seen definite evidence of voter suppression. And some of that is being backed up by video evidence, all kinds of technological evidence. And so the involvement of youth in this election is really a sea change and will change the dynamic of Nigerian politics going forward if it is sustained.
Very important. Uchenna, Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa and the seventh most populated in the world. Now, unlike many nations that seeing a population decline, Nigeria is expected to continue to grow, and a lot of opportunities simply aren't there right now. So many young people are leaving Nigeria for other places, the United States, Europe, just to name a couple. How big is this challenge? What do the young people, even with that elastic definition that Nigeria has, what do the young people have to look forward to?
Actually, what they have to look forward to is what the last speaker actually spoke about, their involvement in decision-making in the country. Because the truth actually is the solution does not really lie in running out of the country, because that has continued to happen now and again. It didn't just start today. I say, remember way back in the Second Republic, you know, we had all those kind of exodus, and it continues to happen. It's a natural trend. It's not just in Nigeria, it's happening in other countries. However, I think that what has happened in this particular election is a demonstration of the fact that young people in Nigeria have decided to take the destiny into their own hands by getting involved, because the idea of just allowing the old order to persist, honestly, is not sustainable. whatever may have happened in this election, whatever is the outcome of this election, the youths have made a very loud statement, and even the Labour Party of Peter Obi that just started probably 7 months ago, the impact it has made in the election is a testament to the fact that young people are hungry, they are eager for new direction, they are eager for effective participation. But the truth is that the gerontocrats, so to speak, have really continued to dominate the system, even using young people as well to damage the system. So going forward, I just think that this is a beginning, so to speak, because youths have never really been involved as much as they have in this particular election, because the apathy that used to exist within the system has been so much that they just don't care, all right? And the use of technology. Most young people are savvy with technology, and it's also playing a major role. And I also hope that it will continue. One other thing I just want to also mention about the other segment you talked about, the climate change issue. I also think that another way to go about it is also to involve young people, because they represent the future of the world. You know, I was involved in hosting a conference that we had to involve Nigerian university students ahead of COP27 in Egypt. And it kind of worked, it kind of helped, because some of them need to get involved in this type of issue, because they are the future of the world. All these other people ruling Nigeria, mostly older people and all that, they have very few years compared to young people. All right. So if you ask me, running away from the country is not necessarily a solution, because even when you run away, you hardly can contribute back home because you are limited. You can't even, some of us outside the United States cannot even vote from here. It's a challenge. And we can only just stay here and be, pontificating and selling ideas. But for you to really effect change, you have to be in the system to, get things going.
And on that point, Remy, I would like to bring you in. I liked what Uchenna had to say about young people being active right now because they believe they have destiny in their own hands. But obviously, this election process has just been very difficult with fraud, with chaos, with disinformation going out, and now many candidates are calling for even a new election. I want to play you one of the observers of this. The Economic Community of West African States had to say about watching this election unfold.
Late arrival of polling officials, voting materials, and in some cases, the delivery of wrong materials at polling stations across the country. There were postponements of elections in some polling units due to electoral violence or logistical challenges.
Remy, obviously a lot of hope for the future, but still plagued by the old problems. How does Nigeria get past this? What do you think about that statement? And is this election going to be so tainted that it's going to have to be tossed out?
I agree with what the statement said. I think it reflected the reality in many parts of the country, unfortunately. A lot of people are disappointed. I think the only person and people who are happy with the way this election was conducted is the ruling party, because their presidential candidate won. All the other candidates and all the other parties are essentially unhappy with the way the process went. And a lot of young voters also feel disenfranchised, and not just young voters. And so there were many problems with the election. Is the result going to be tossed out? We'll see. I'm sure definitely there are going to be a lot of court cases, and there's going to be a lot of attempts by the opposition and parties to get the elections conducted again. Will that work? We'll see. Somehow I doubt it. I think most probably we will live in a reality in which the ruling party's candidate, Bola Tinubu, will eventually become the president of Nigeria. And then we'll see how the youth react from there. I agree with everything that's been said with regards to the future of the country. Look, 60% of Nigerians are under the age of 25. And on the other hand, the country is ruled by 70-year-olds, essentially. And so one thing that will definitely bring change to Nigeria is biology. And so within the next 10 to 15 years, that generation which is in charge now is simply no longer going to be in charge. That's the biological reality that's going to happen. And so we're essentially going to have people who are perhaps in their 40s, 50s now, who will be running Nigeria in 10, 15 years' time. And the question, of course, is what is going to be the quality of those people? Because, age in of itself does not guarantee you quality. Just because somebody's young doesn't mean they're going to be a good leader. You need people who have the right values. You need people who have the right vision for the country. You need people who are competent. And so you essentially need to create a system that is going to produce these kinds of people. Is that system being created? I think it is slowly. I think there is a real rise in the political consciousness of the younger generation. People look to other countries. This is a social media era we live in. People look to other countries and they say, look how things work in country X and in country Y, and they're developed and they have this kind of GDP per capita, and they have infrastructure that's working, and they have systems that are working, and we want that here. They're not smarter than us by definition as people, so why can't we have that here?
Fair question.
So that kind of hunger is definitely growing within the people, and especially among the young people, but not only. And so I think the sort of that momentum is there to be able to get into the system and create the kinds of structures, positive structures, that could actually bring change to the country.
Well, Remy, real quickly, oil is so important to the nation, but clearly you can argue that it has just been squandered over the years, and also rife with graft, corruption. If the ruling party is going to come back into power, as you said, could happen, aren't there going to be concerns that it's just going to be same old, same old?
100% there are going to be such concerns. And the question will be, what kind of pathway will the ruling party, will the ruling party's candidate Bola Tinubu decide to take? Will he decide to simply maintain the status quo as is, or will he decide to perhaps bring in some new people into his government, perhaps some reform-minded people into his government, and put them into important positions? That remains to be seen. He'll essentially be in charge now. He'll be able to decide what he wants to do. And on this note, I think there's a little bit of unpredictability there. And so perhaps he might decide to bring in some type of reform-minded people into the government. We'll see how that works. Okay. With regards to oil, I don't see any possibility of Nigeria stopping to drill for oil. Oil contributes more than 90% of the export revenue of Nigeria. Yes. And so essentially, if the Nigerian government stopped exporting oil today, it would go completely broke. So it's not going to do that.
Kingsley, you ran for president in 2019, the last election. I want to read a tweet that you recently issued. Quote, "What I saw, past, present, future, that made me decide to exit partisan politics in Nigeria completely. We aren't ready for real democracy. Too much poverty and the financial corruption it enables. Too many evil, powerful, vested interests, weak institutions, illiterate electorate." Pretty gloomy picture. Give us a reason for hope.
Yes, there is, in fact, a reason for hope. And that's what we are seeing. I mean, I was reflecting a personal choice that I have made. It's not to say that citizens should no longer be involved in politics. They should. But, I was speaking about running for elections as a candidate. You need a lot of financial muscle. You need a lot of, you need educated citizens, and the literacy rate in Nigeria is just 62%. And that's quite low, relatively speaking. And when even people who have gone to school and are formally educated, there has been a mental corruption that has gone on in Nigeria for the past 4 or 5 decades. And so the value systems at this point do not support, real change. Perhaps the young people who are coming in now in this particular election, when I ran in 2019, I was a candidate of the youth, of the young people, but I was simply laying the foundation. But that work, that investment has paid off in this election in many ways. So, I also want to speak about institutions. This is a very, very big need that Nigeria has. Nigeria's institutions are terribly weak and corrupt. And unless we have a political leader who is determined to build strong, credible institutions, it's going to be very difficult for the country to experience real progress. Look at INEC, the electoral body. Every 4 years, They say they're ready.
Right.
They, huge budgets, $500 million was given to them to prepare for this election. And look at where we are.
Indeed.
We now have a crisis of legitimacy. And that's because the human factor and the corruption in the system, fundamentally undermines the independence, the so-called independence of the institution. They are not modern in the way they think. Elections are a huge logistical endeavor. And it should be done with a project management and risk management mindset. I believe that private sector companies and concerns that can deliver those kinds of results should be more involved. Instead, it's run simply as a political project. And that leaves it open to being hijacked, open to being undermined, open to its legitimacy being questioned, and of course to huge operational failures, such as we have seen today.
Uchenna, we only have a couple of minutes left, and I really want to pick up on some of the things we've discussed about some of the violence that has just played out, and also Boko Haram in the northern part of the country. Many people say as Nigeria goes, really that entire region goes. Kind of explain how important this is to an international audience for Nigeria to really take this democracy, run with it, and build credibility in that part of the continent.
Actually, that's the wish of every one of us. So for Nigeria to be stable, because anything that happens in Nigeria will reverberate the entire continent and potentially the entire world as well. I'm really worried, just like the last speaker spoke about the weakness of our institutions, the institutions in Nigeria, and the corruption, the pervasive corruption is so endemic that even sometimes, yes, we are kind of expressing optimism about the young people, but the truth also is that the young people, because of hunger and the lack of education and the poor value system, somehow most of them compromise, because that's why those old system will continue to persist and use them and play pawn and all that, because they give them money and all they understand is money. All right, so they don't really care how they even kill. Even all the people who kill opponents are not old people. These are young people that are used to kill political opponents. Right? Who and talking about all this Boko Haram and all that, you hardly find old people within the midst of the Boko Haram and all this insurgency. It's the young people. You find all over the place the so-called bandits and non-gunmen and all that. The people, those guys are young people, not old people.
Uchenna,
right?
I'm sorry, we're running out of time. I have to cut you off there. Gentlemen, it has been a very eye-opening discussion. Uchenna, Remy, Kingsley, I want to thank you all for your time. Hope we'll be discussing this again in a very positive fashion that the election has wrapped up. But that does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Calebs in Washington, D.C. As always, thanks for being with us.